Good morning, everyone. So my name is Natalie. I'm going to present today about understanding disaster recovery cost, and I just want to start this presentation quickly by asking, has anyone ever was part of the disaster recovery process, just so I know how to? Okay, that's good. And has anyone was part of the estimating of the cost in the organization of projects, or even cared about the cost of the cloud? Okay, just so I know which side I should focus more. So my name is Natalie. I work as a cloud infra, SRE, DevOps, any titles I probably had during my career. I work at different companies. Sometimes I do consulting around DRs, compliances, or cost optimization, estimation, understanding of the cloud. I have to make, I am AWS community builder. That's why there is a small caveat to this presentation that a lot of examples I use from AWS, but I work in different clouds as well, but just the primarily one is AWS, and it's easier for me to use examples from one cloud provider during the presentation. But theoretically, you can take any of these practices and apply them to any of the other, at least to the Azure or GCP cloud provider. My LinkedIn is here. It's a real URL. That's what I use, so don't think I put something non-existing here. And then the agenda is we're gonna just go over disaster recovery. So if someone is not familiar what it is, they can just get up to speed with everyone else. Cost estimation, optimization, just explaining what it is, why we should care about numbers like that. And then understanding how it connects to our business, or organization, or projects, because every company has a revenue, right? So what part of business should focus, shall we even be focusing on things like that to make sure our business is running? And then estimation, and then I will present some practices, examples, how would anyone take the project and break it into pieces and understand how they can calculate the cost. So let's start. So disaster, if you working as an engineer, and I guess in both cases, if you're using on-prem infrastructure or cloud infrastructure, there are certain disasters can happen during the life of the product on cloud or on hardware. And the way we categorize them is like natural disasters are earthquakes, floods. So when we when we rent in the data centers equipment, or we are in the cloud, we want to think about things like that. I know they don't happen often, but they do happen. I guess the recent one happened in Germany when data center burned, right? So this is real. Technical failures, sometimes the power goes off, or other things like that, they can happen. Sometimes it's just human action. I worked at many companies where accidentally, when myself, I deleted database or some kind of Kubernetes cluster. So this all considered disasters. Sometimes I work with people, and I have to explain that being highly available in the cloud doesn't mean that you are good or protected from disaster recovery. Just to give you an example on this slide, that high availability, it's when you're planning, for example, your application to be hosted on Kubernetes. And you can use different AZs to protect yourself. You can use different failover techniques, but these are not fully covered disaster recovery practices when you actually have to take some of your running product and transfer it to the different region. It could be with the same cloud provider, or if you're on a multi-cloud, it could be different cloud provider. So this slide actually represents what disaster recovery means. It's more technically complex process, and that's what we need to keep in mind when we're talking about it. So this slide just explains that high availability and disaster recovery, they probably conceptually similar, but when you have a disaster recovery, or when you're building your process of disaster recovery, the workloads that you are transferring or recovering, they are something that you need to pay attention. And the very crucial point is the time. So when failures or disasters are happening, it's really important to build the resiliency around our product, but also is the speed, how fast we can do it. And when we build the workloads and we, let's say, if our product is popular and we want to have, sometimes we want to make sure that no matter what happened, we still can function. The workloads with our projects, pipelines, clouds are functioning. We need to understand what are parts of the disaster recovery we have. That's when we start building our resiliency. And when we think about resiliency, we are usually designing recovery objectives. And the main points, like the first two numbers that will usually be written when you start, and in the end when you finish, will be RTO and RPO. And these are real numbers, so it's not like some abstracts. Call it like a baseline, because if you review your disaster recovery process and you keep testing it and maybe improving it over time, these numbers probably in the beginning will be huge, because like, let's say if you just start, I worked in the companies where these numbers like was not even possible to calculate because there was nothing there. But usually we want to make them as short as possible. So for people who probably first time seeing the RTO and RPO, I just want to show the next slide. And that will give you an idea that usually disasters do happen, so we have to think about this, that this has already happened. So how quickly we could recover. Let's say we have backups and we take them every hour. And when we design anything like that, we need to understand that probably once disaster will happen, the hour before we took the next backup will be some kind of missing data. So we need to not just recover, but maybe in some cases fulfill the data later. So that's what we call the RPO, which is like point of time, how much data we can lose. And just to bring you down to the real example, let's say we work in a social application, right? If customer cannot see comments from 1 day or 2 days, probably okay, as long as we have a warning that we are in the maintenance, we're recovering. But if you're a bank and people cannot see the transactions or cannot understand how much money they spend, probably a big problem, right? So these points are important. And then obviously the time is how quick we can recover from any disaster, how quick we can do the failover, restart the database, and bring back our servers or clusters, whatever is there. So this probably when you're planning for disaster recovery, as well as these it will be in numbers. They will obviously be your important baselines to start understanding how much it's going to cost you to be that quick, as well as that recoverable or resilient. So what we can say is that resiliency for us in this scenario is recover quickly. Everyone wants this. Everyone wants to make sure the product is running, the revenue is generating, customers are happy. But when you're in the cloud, you should also understand when you start your disaster recovery, for example, for the cases that region went down, probably everyone around will have the same process, and everyone will start reserving the same resources at the same time. So for cloud solutions, we also need to think about options when we can quickly recover and acquire resources, because as we all know, in the cloud, we need to buy the resource, purchase them, and make sure they're ready for us to start deploying. If you're using CI/CD pipelines, or hopefully no one does it, but manual deploys still exist, but resources acquisition is something that we all have to plan. And then another important thing I have to make aware, I have to communicate that I keep saying that there is miscommunication specifically, definitely not among like DevOps or SRE people, but there is this saying of like, oh, I'm in the cloud, I'm safe, or like Azure will take care of my project if something goes wrong. But there is a clear separation in this slide is from AWS documentation, where you can see the definition where cloud provider will not be responsible for things like networking misconfigurations, for things like, absence of the backups. If someone deleted the backup, there is nothing to do with your cloud provider, probably something to do with the practices that exist in the company. So this is important. I know this is probably very abstract, but understanding those things and designing your disaster recovery around those things at first, very helpful. So as we run through the disaster recovery, since I saw some of you did this or at least heard about the process, we can say that our disaster recovery will be a combination of services and strategies that we will use in the company to get us to the good place and make sure we're not going to have any data loss and hopefully minimum downtime. So this is where our SLA and SLOs are coming picture. So now let's talk about cost estimation and optimization. So we mentioned in the beginning that RPO and RTO exist. If someone went through the compliance, you probably had to write down these numbers, at least for SOC 2 compliances or SOC compliances. So what is the understanding of estimation of your cost? So this is the process when we're trying to calculate how much resources we acquired in the cloud. And then once we start using them, buying them, growing the product, how can we estimate that? And when we convert this to the disaster recovery, we want to understand how we can estimate the cost for that process, how expensive it is. And because there are different strategies, we can say, okay, we have perfect disaster recovery process, but it's probably very expensive. Does it make sense for our company? Probably yes or not, depends on the revenue, and then we need to, if it's not, we need to optimize it. If it's good, we still can optimize it and think how we can do better, maybe, or we can probably try another disaster recovery and things like that. So estimation is forecasting how much we're going to spend, and optimization is reviewing those costs. And again, it's pretty cool. We can do it with a lot of automation. This is what I'm going to talk later. And then business continuity planning. I feel like it's important if you're becoming like an architect or principal, understand that everyone likes to experiment, everyone love to write the code, everyone love to write the POC and try new things. R&D is a very interesting team in the company to work, but our goal of any product we are working on, that's why we have jobs, is to make sure the business is running. And if the things we build are costlier than the revenue we are making, probably we're going to lose the job. So the business continuity planning should be in our heads. Like if we use resources or build very cool tools, we need to think how to do it in an efficient way. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't use resources, but when we build, let's say, disaster recovery process, we test it, we select the strategy, we probably should think how do we take resources down or use the right strategy to make sure that no one comes back to us and tell us that we are spending too much. So components which are involved in a DR and that really going to affect our cost is compute, storage, and the rest you can see. The one I want to point out is licenses. I was in a situation when you go through the disaster recovery process, right? And let's say you're using a specific machine with a specific license, and you never thought that this machine can go down. Requesting a new license might take days, right? So when you're in a disaster recovery process and you don't have a machine with the license you really need for production, you're probably not going to recover quickly. So this should go in your disaster recovery as well as in the cost, because buying two licenses probably will cost you some amount of money. So the tools, that's what this talk is about. So the tools are pretty much simple. If it might sound like it's some kind of like a financial ops or FinOps responsibility, but it's good for architects, for engineers to understand the budget that they can spend on the product. What I mean by that is, let's say you decided to write a super cool multi-threading Java application, and then for that you selected some cool, nice instance, which is really CPU intensive, and just these days everyone into the GPUs, let's say it's super powered by lots of GPUs. And then once you build the product, in the end, it's just not available. The instance type cannot be used and things like that. So this can be researched ahead of time. The pricing calculators, the cost management tools, they all available. Let's say for the third-party tool example here, if you use infrastructure as a code, tools like Terraform, there is like infra cost. If you in the Kubernetes, right, and you just want to get optimization of your workloads, understand if you're even using the right workloads, or you never even thought of like drilling into the application to see how much resources you're requesting in your Helm chart, or just pure configs, and how much app actually uses, they're free. So to me, it's a good indicator to see if we actually utilizing things correctly. And then, as I mentioned, every cloud provider have those tools. They are free. You can choose, pick, and calculate, add everything you need. These things also have good APIs. So if you like writing code, which sometimes I do as well, you can just script it up, script it all, and just get those answers. Why it's also helpful? When you're working with a team, and let's say you're an architect or principal and you have questions from engineers every day, or within your company practices, you have specific amount of instances that people only can use, and someone asks you, hey, can I use this instance? And you have no idea how much it's going to cost you. You can quickly run the scripts or calculators and give them the answer. And then you kind of, you will be a go-to person, but again, if you have added this part to your CI, that can be useful if you have time. Another tool which I found super useful, and I think if you're using Datadog for monitoring, they also have very cool solution. Tools like this. I know they are very UI driven, but we like dashboards. Why these tools are pretty interesting, that there is no way that we can understand the whole cloud, the whole usage of what we have in the cloud provider. And QuickSight, it actually supports different providers. QuickSight with AWS, they can give you details. If we're talking about storage, you can see the storage bucket. You can see amount of data dumped into the bucket. And if we transfer it to the disaster recovery, right, all of us take snapshots. But how many of us actually cleans the snapshots? So we forgot about it. Or let's say a person who set them up not longer with the company, we can actually see that data and can analyze why they're snapshots from 10 years old, unless it's required by compliance. And if we don't need them, we probably set up some cron job and clean them up. We also can see the calls from, let's say, the bucket. We can see the databases. We can see a lot of things. So now I'm going to walk through the example. Example is I have an application, my application using the Pilot Lite. This is a very cool slide where you can see, if you want to start with the disaster recovery, you can see the options you have, and the last line actually show you the cost. This is obviously, you can mix and match this. You can, for, let's say, your databases, you can use one strategy. For clusters, you can use another one. And then when you decided like what things are there, you go through the specific steps. Like what I do, I decide which critical workloads I should be focusing on. Let's say if it's just infra, if it's CI, I probably don't need it. Maybe I do if it's part of my DR. And then I select the list of the tier 1 resources. I go through the review, compliance, all the steps. I collect my data. And then there is this cost factor thing where I prioritize which services should be number 1. And here's the example. Let's say if I have cluster and I have 2 weird instances after I run through that process, I see that my cluster uses this M5 weird instances, 3 of them, and the load is not that effective. And then I see there is my data team uses this C5 instances that they almost not even used. How do I optimize this? All right, so my objective in this case will be indicate if this is the right type or indicate why the load during the day is so little. This is a very heavy slide, but just please pay attention on these two highlights. This is me calculating how much I spent if I have a failover, which is the transferring my EKS cluster to the different regions. So if my whole budget for that cluster monthly is almost 10,000, my just failover and keeping this active through 24/7, 30 days will cost me almost $5,000. And then I want to ask myself, is it a good DR strategy? Because it's almost 50% of my budget, and my answer will be probably not. And the reason for that is probably not the right size for these instances just to be there, standing in a different cluster. It's probably not the right type to keep, again, 24/7. And I can go to the pricing calculator and select the specific instance that could be as good as this one, but not that large, because my cluster is mostly focused on the CPU load or the memory load, and I can see that. And then if I talk to my manager, I can say, hey, do we need full-blown cluster running in a different region? The answer probably will be no, unless you, again, some cases, if you like bank or financial or Bitcoin company that doesn't have market hours, you probably do. So then you go and just review the instance type, some other things. In this case, I will make sure that I only have a failover with the 3 instances, and they will be a little bit different type. So when the disaster happens, I still have like a couple of instances to start the process. And then in the end, I will just see that theoretically for that failover process, I can save 89% of the cost just on that, on those instances from this slide. So the same we can do with the backup, right? On the previous slide, I showed that we have RDS, we take snapshots, but actually with our cloud providers, I can enable continuous backup, which gives me like up to 3 seconds option to recover. It will cost me $50. So when I spend 10,000 on my cluster, probably $50 is not a big deal. So I will turn this on. And the same will apply to my other instance, which, I'm just trying to jump through the slide, apologies, which was an instance from the data team, right? This was C5, it was almost not utilized. And on this example, I'm showing you that if you have only a dashboard, it's pretty simple to see that if I open the compute using that intelligent dashboard and I see that the instance almost not used, it's only 59% and it's huge instance type, can I do better? And then if I go on a different tab, I see that already I get recommendation and I can pick between those two. I will research them. I will take pricing calculators, API, or any tool you like. And I can see, so even if I use 2 of the same instance with the same memory type, excuse me, I get cheaper spend versus I just use this C5 large, right? This is one instance. It has 4 CPUs and 8 of memory. So two of the other type already get me better cost. So after doing that, I will have option to select 2 DR strategies, the second one and the third one, and most likely the third one will be better for some things might not. But I will have some amount of savings and I can actually spend that cost to do or improve better. This what would be my result, 1 or 2 instances for data team, and my cluster completely can scale down. The only thing that will change, that probably now my instance will be actually used, because if we have 1 and maybe scale to 2 when it's higher usage, we will see the graph change. If we have monitoring, and then For RDS, we obviously added the backup, so that will add $50 to our spend. What other things we can do? Schedule scaling. So if you like to code, there is a lot of step functions, there is a Lambda function when you can set up monitoring on your resources, monitoring on DRs, and then add scaling. Tagging is a lot of popular talks going into the tagging, but sometimes it's really hard when you want to do something quick. Let's say you want to start doing DR, but to improve on the tagging, you have to review your entire infrastructure as a code if you never had that. So to me, it's more like an improvement versus like a blocker for actually doing things. And then the last part is understanding what your load is. So in your company, in your different teams, most likely everyone does similar things in terms of like the language they use, application they build. So it makes sense to maybe buy more instances for a year or two. And then this is honestly the work we should be doing with our finance team to understand what budget we can spend on this. And the summary of this talk is the monitoring. But even the cost requires certain monitoring. If we're talking about disaster recovery, we should understand what this project is. It's just any other project. It should be properly architected and it should be properly estimated. The reason for that is I think that disaster recovery is probably the second largest project in our company that will be really expensive, also super risky, because even supporting disaster recovery and testing all these processes will be costly. And honestly, let's say if you have, like, if this is not working for you, I would suggest once you have a disaster recovery project, you will need to test it. You can set up even like basic tagging through only these resources with Terraform, CloudFormation, Ansible, Puppet, your tool of preference, and then enable the dashboard ahead of time, and then just look how much it costs just to get a baseline. And then it's easier to see which area you would like to improve. And if you see through the most costly resources like compute, storage, that's a good point to start if you're not satisfied with the number you got. And then right sizing, we covered through the presentation. Before you even select the region, verify that all the services actually exist in another regions. With certain cloud providers, you can get actually cheaper or higher cost for the same resource. This is an important thing to understand because sometimes you can get surprised. And obviously automation. I feel like all these processes can be automated. There is no need to have Excel sheets or like anything that can stop you from doing this. And I hope this was useful. Thank you so much.
Are there no questions? So you get this one that we have in the camera. Please. You have to speak in. Speak into the. Not just hold it.
Okay. Oh. Okay.
Yes, I
You
can
can hold it as a pillow, but
Yeah.
please speak in.
One question about the backups. Do you advise to do backups in separate accounts or in the same account? Because for my practice, I'm doing especially in separate AWS account. To avoid hackers or something where it's not possible to log in.
Backup of data. Okay, so
yeah,
when
database or S3 storage data, something like that. We are synchronizing it to the exactly separate account.
So the question was if we have data storages with cloud provider, seems like you're on AWS and you have some kind of RDS or database instance and S3, should you back it up into the different regions? So for the disaster recovery, it depends how you design. I would say it's a good idea. First of all, when you have backups, it's not always the right strategy for disaster recovery in general, because depends how you're taking them, right? But you should consider with every time you take a backup, it will be extra cost to transfer it to the different region. Exactly. So once this is all calculated and agreed, I would say this is good. For the databases, I probably will question that because I don't know how quick you will recover from your backup. For AWS specifically, for example, for RDS, they have something called replication. And it's much easier and safer to have the whole database replicated. Again, if your database is huge, and if data loss is not that crucial, you probably don't need that. But if it's something like presented here, financial company, I would definitely go with replication. It will be costlier, but then your disaster recovery will only be about building the cluster of servers, enabling the connection, and just transferring the traffic. So the time recovery will be much, much faster versus when you have to take a backup, unpack it, make sure it's good. Like, it's good. Also, if you have RPO number, sometimes you use the backup. Let's say you restore everything, the product is working, but there's still data loss. So there's a setup which I have when I use the backup to just restore the missing data. For example, or let's say if my app can function from right now, but there is now data for tomorrow, and there is some job that data team uses to fulfill the data.
We have an agreement with data loss. So we can lose the data for 5 hours or something like that.
Yes, so then backup is good, but the transfer of the data could be very expensive. To cut the cost of this, right, going back to the topic, I would just start doing the backups and replication region which you're going to run disaster recovery from. But if you ever have to do the backward, I don't know, for staging maybe, then it's going to be expensive. So
But the basic question, do you advise to have backups in the same account or the split accounts in different regions and or only save the data in different region to avoid the attacks?
For the security purposes?
Yeah.
What else is this backup used for? Do you use it to fulfill the staging, or you just like dump it and store it?
No, it's productive data.
I would say, well, I'm not a security engineer, but let's say if your all credentials for all the accounts stored in the same vault, does it make a difference? Probably not. So if you have a specific security practices in mind, how people get into the accounts, SSO, all that set up in a good way, then it's really separated, then I would probably say yes. If your management or company agree that extra cost for transferring data is good, I would say yes. But please think about recovery with that backup, if it has to be used in the main account. Yeah. Because sometimes you can have it in both. No one is
in the case of recovery, we are switching to the maintenance mode, and it can be like 3 hours or something like this, and we will transfer data back to the clusters.
Mm-hmm. And then, okay, that sounds good, but yeah, there is a lot of things to consider because, and I don't want to take anyone's time, but. There are cases where it could be complicated as well, right? Let's say if your CI is not configured with that account credentials, things like that. Like there's so many points, but in general, I personally think it's a good practice. But again, I'm not the security engineer to judge on the protection of that data. With the 3 buckets, you can also configure monitoring of your logs for actually accessing them. You can get an alert. There's like a lot of things. And we can chat after that. I would love to answer all your questions after.
Yes, then we can take another question. Thank you.
Sorry. You talked about ensuring yourself against region failure, but I mean, if you look at AWS in Europe, everybody's using Ireland because Ireland is far ahead technologically. Ireland is the biggest one. Ireland is pretty fast if you have to reach the US or if you reach the European regions. But what would happen actually to your setup if Ireland fails? I mean, you have the other European regions, which are much, much smaller than the Irish region, like Frankfurt and Zurich and Paris. Are you sure, or if you need to ensure yourself against that, are we sure that we are getting all the resources that we need in a new region if that should happen?
This is a good question, and just letting you know, in US we do have also specific region when everything is available, but then other regions could be different. It's not as bad, I don't want to use the word bad, but it's better, but that's why there was a slide I ran through which was cost factors. So when you talk, if you're thinking about disaster recovery, you select an amount of services, you have a list of them that you are really care. And then to me, if my cloud provider doesn't provide those, it doesn't mean that I should not build my disaster recovery process. Then I probably will go and you see what other providers offer me. There's also on-prem, and there's a lot of big companies and financial companies in US, they use on-prem for the specific reasons, because they need that data to be somewhere that probably enabling something with a cloud provider will be too expensive. But that's not like you need to move all your setups there, right? Most likely EC2s will be there with even AWS. And then once you, or architect in a company do that, they need to, that's why this is useful. They can see if it actually makes sense financially. Because signing up with a new cloud provider, enabling them, obviously paying the bills and all that, could be too much of a hassle. That's why this list I showed doesn't only show the services, it's also support and the license, and all that is the cost. And let's say when you do that, and you're like, oh, just adding only backup to the different cloud provider makes sense. It's not that expensive. It could be like only $50. It's not, but then you probably will sleep better, your team will sleep better, just it will be extra CI step and things like that. Because I don't recommend on like only one cloud provider, but I'm recommending selecting their strategy what fits for you, but most of the cases people don't put enough thought in it, or they think it's really expensive without actually digging into the insights of the cost. And understanding, okay, enabling another cloud provider is just 1/4 of work, which could be harsh on my team, but then later we all can be covered and sleep well and compliance is passed and things like that. I hope I answer your questions, but again, it's on a case basis. But this talk actually enables you to think outside of what you use and calculate that.
Hi. How do you handle different requirements for disaster recovery? For example, if you're a company that has multiple applications and some are really intolerant for data loss, do you place them on different managed clusters, or what's your approach to this?
Good question. A disaster recovery process in general is a test for how are you doing, and that's every time you start it, you do the first try and you fail. Like, I have not seen anyone who never failed. And then you go and work with the team. Let's say if the team build the app that is not good, let's say we move it to a different cluster, and app will never stand up if it cannot connect to database. So this is just a development process going back and forth. If you went through the disaster process, it's usually a huge team of people from different departments, so it should be escalated. But that's a good time to review if app actually makes sense. Also, there is an important person like architect who should be aware of that, because as a DevOps engineer, for me, it's really hard to tell people how to build apps. But if there is a task that they should, like, I work a lot on Kubernetes, that's why a lot of my examples from Kubernetes. If I look through the Helm chart, an application requesting that many resources that my entire cluster has, probably not good. We should probably find it before. So I assume that disaster recovery also give you dashboards, because you need to see of life and health and all the basics, and this should be discovered not during disaster, hopefully. Things happen, but.
Thank you. So we take these two questions and then we go
first?
to the coffee break.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Have you worked with deployments or configuration across clouds, or that mix cloud and on-prem? And if so, how does this setup change all the consideration you've done here?
That's an amazing question because, yes, if it's automated, the hardest part is how do you trigger all this setup, right? And when you have different clouds, and let's say if it's dependent backup in one cloud, but you are storing things in this cloud, how do you, and if that has to happen at a specific time, how does your runner, CI knows when to trigger what? This is challenging, and again, that's why disaster recovery should be tested. Because, to give you an example, when I was building disaster recovery, when I was really early in my career, I put my runner in the same account because I just didn't know any better, where I would assume that where my main things were, right? So it's US East 1, and I put my runner there. And then my manager asked, what if this is the disaster region? Why would you put the trigger there, right? So with the disaster recovery, you will have a proper architecture of that. But the main cost will be, the main concern will be how do you trigger and how do you automate that. But there are good practices there. I don't think cost will not be even the concern there if you already have two clouds. And we can chat after this. I think the presentation is about cost, but I don't think that case will have any cost dependency if you're already on a different cloud.
Thanks.
A big wake, but just having the time.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation. We're using GCP, and we have tried out managed Kubernetes backups, and it's amazing. It's working like very fast, very well, but the cost escalates very quickly, very fast. Mm-hmm. These guys, they charge per pod. So for a company that has like hundreds of pods, workloads, microservices, it's getting extremely expensive. So I've seen many companies, what they're trying to do is they keep their backups and they try to do recovery from other cloud providers that they're much cheaper. Now, obviously, it has like certain implications and difficulties. But is this something that you think it's fine? If you're having your service in X cluster on GCP and then your backup and disaster recovery on another provider?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer will be there is even third party which will sell you the same service way cheaper. But then if you dig into because when you do disaster recovery, you're trying to build your RTO, your understanding your SLA, we should check theirs. Because in some cases, they build on top of the same cloud providers we use. So there's you're paying for your own data traveling to them and then coming back to you. So it does make sense. But what you just described, it completely makes sense. Again, enabling another cloud, how hard it is. Do you have people in your team who understand another cloud? Maybe not. If it's Terraform, probably it's easier to start. I say Terraform, infrastructure as a code. I use Terraform a lot. If, let's say, if you just, again, select the services you need. Don't disaster recovery everything. And then you see that most of the time there's little, not every, you don't need to recover this entire system we build every day, and then just compare the cost. But that's something I would recommend. And again, if you saw the news in Australia, I think someone deleted the backup of Australian government from Google Cloud. Nothing against Google Cloud, but I'm just saying, but luckily they had the backup in some premises. So that's a good use case for us that we should use it. If it's a cost, if the cost makes sense. But there are options these days that this is efficient. But just consider those things when you're shopping around. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we are in time. Thank you for the great Q&A and for the great presentation. And yeah, thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much. Thank you.